I want you guys to imagine for a second that God gave you a task to reach a completely unreached tribe in the Ecuadorian jungle that had never had contact with people outside of their tribe. It's quite a monumental task to think about, and I would have had no idea how to even go about it until I read this book, Through the Gates of Splendor, which is about the 5 missionary men and their wives and families. The 5 men were Jim Elliot, Nate Saint, Ed McCully, Roger Udarian, and Pete Fleming, along with their wives and children. You may have heard of Jim Elliot and Elisabeth Elliot. His wife is the one who wrote this book. Now, these 5 men, these missionaries, were called in various ways to the Ecuadorian jungle to reach a specific group of people that had not been reached with the gospel before. And when it comes to their calling, all of them had different reasons why they were going, but Jim Elliot had this amazing quote I had to share with you guys that sums up what their belief and their burden that they felt for specifically people that did not know Jesus. We've talked a lot about unreached people in this class, and this burden is shared very, very clearly in this quote. Jim Elliot said, "I dare not stay home while the people of Ecuador perish. What if the well-filled church in the homeland needed stirring? Who cares? They have the scriptures, Moses and the prophets, and a whole lot more. Their condemnation is written on their bank books and in the dust of their Bible covers." Wow, that quote's strong. But that's the burden that these guys felt. They knew these Akua people, or the specific people they ended up trying to reach, needed the gospel, and they'd never heard it before, and so they wanted to do that. So they developed this burden. Now, this tribe specifically had not had any friendly contact with any other people pretty much in recorded history that anyone knew about. Even amongst the other Ecuadorian indigenous tribes, they never had contact, and they were killers. No one knew why they were killers, but they killed each other. They killed anyone they really came in contact with. And so this was a monumental challenge, but the men had a burden and a love for these people, and they wanted them to know Jesus. And so they began something called Operation Akua, where these 5 guys began planning and figuring out how to reach them with the gospel. First, they had to find where the tribe lived, which took a few weeks, flying around in this thick jungle to figure out. They knew about where they lived, but they needed to find specifically where their homes were. So, secondly, they could begin dropping presents to them and slowly trying to show these people that, hey, we're friendly, you can trust us, we just want to share presents with you. So that's what they did, and it was very encouraging because eventually the Akua people very quickly started sending them presents back, and so they felt really good about that relationship that was building there. Third, they took a step after about 8 weeks of dropping presents. They decided, hey, let's try to make physical contact in person, and so they landed on a river beach, and began waiting and hoping and sending out some signals to try to let them know, hey, this is where we are, go to the river. They waited for a few days, and eventually 3 Akuas came to visit them, a man and 2 women, and this was a very successful visit. It was peaceful. The man actually jumped in the airplane and flew around to show off for his fellow tribesmen. And so they were encouraged by that, but they had to wait a few more days. And after a few more days, they were growing very discouraged until they got word that a group of men from the Akua tribe were actually coming their way. They were very excited. They told their wives, they said, hey, we'll be back in contact with you after this visit. We'll let you know how it goes. And from then on, all contact was lost with these 5 men because the men came from the Akua tribe and murdered the 5 men, the 5 missionaries there on the beach. It was a very, very sad story. But this book had me reflecting a lot on the spiritual lives of these men and women, because these men and women I was struck by how grounded they were and how convicted they were in their faith. That honestly, they had already counted the cost of losing their lives. The wives had too. They had discussed amongst themselves the reality that they could be widows. The men had written in their journals that they were willing to die so the Akua people could know Christ. And honestly, the thing that struck me the most was the widows, their wives' response to the death of their husbands was nothing short of heavenly. The women knew that this was a possibility, and they didn't really even seem to mourn. All of them except one stayed in Ecuador for a time to continue the work to try to reach these people, the work that their husbands had been doing. And actually, this book ends on a cool note. 2 years later, Elisabeth Elliot and her daughter went to live with the Akua people because they finally opened themselves up and let them come live with them. And she shared Jesus with them for several years, and many Akua people came to know Christ. So much of it is the result of the blood that was spilled by these 5 men, the martyrs that they were, opened up the door for the gospel to come to this people that had never had contact with the outside world before. And so as well, this story, these 5 men, became worldwide famous. Many of us probably have heard this story before. I had heard of it before, but I didn't know a lot about it. So it was really interesting to hear about it, but it opened up the doors for so many more missionaries. People were struck by their story and wanted to be a part of the missionary movement because of it. But I have to offer one small critique, which is really hard because these really were saints. They were people to look to emulate when it comes to their walk with Jesus and their burden for people. But the small critique I have was probably just that they were a little too cavalier and not fully embracing and understanding the long history of the Akua people and the fact that they had never really had any kind of good contact with anyone else, especially white people. And so they probably should have taken it a little slower. I think it's probably because they were in their 20s, all of them, and they were just hungry and ready to go, and probably a little too cavalier. So I think they should have been a little more patient. Maybe after the three people came, maybe they would leave for a time, drop some more presents, begin to slowly build that relationship better, would probably be the critique I'd have. Again, which is really hard to do because these people are titans in the faith. They are real true heroes, missionary heroes that I look forward to. And this book impacted me in a lot of ways and really helped me, one, keep perspective on my life and the difficulties I have are nothing like these people, but also gave me a burden for the people and the ministry God's called me to. So hope you guys have a great day. God bless.